Hello, I'm Cecilia Louie of Paper Zen. For the letter J, I'd like to show you how to add color to the middle of the letter. I first did it for a monogram project back in 2011. After you print out the letter from my book, trim some of the excess away. Then get some cardstock. I'm using 80-pound cardstock here, and I'm using 2 sheets of that, and I've got the colored one on top. It doesn't matter what you're using here because it's all going to get covered up. Just make sure it's just slightly larger than your letter. So the next step would be to use a glue stick to glue all these layers together. So after you glue these together, we're going to put the template on top, and then we're going to staple that template in place. Okay? So I'm going to do that, and I'll be right back. Before I start cutting a letter, I always study it and tackle the hardest or the curved areas first. So in the case of the letter J, this small curve should be cut first. In my last video, I showed how I kept my hand and knife at a 90-degree angle to the paper. The same goes here. Try to make the passes consistent and in a fluid motion. If you have a strong pair of scissors, you can also try cutting it that way. When you cut the easiest or straight areas last, you keep the template intact and you end up with a more structurally intact sheet, which actually makes it easier to work with. If you have an electric die cutter, it makes your job so much easier because it's going to cut these letters exactly the same. But I'll show you another way to make sure that these are aligned. Of course, you could just apply some glue and hold it in your hand and just use your fingers to align the edges. But I have found that I can be off just doing it that way as well. So I'll show you how I really align these edges. So because this is the longest straight edge, what I'm going to do is put it against my table and then use my fingers to guide along these edges to make sure I'm making everything as straight as I can. Now let's outline the letter. Place your strip on the corner and fold on the next corner. So using this finger, help it align this edge with this edge. Then use your thumb to mark right here on that corner where it needs to fold. You can't really use my book strip lengths right now because what we're doing is going on the outside of the letter, and if you're cutting it by hand especially, it's going to waver a little bit here and there, so it's best to just let your fingers feel the outside lining of the letter, and that's going to be the more exact method. So I'm going to use a crochet hook to guide this curve in place. So I don't want to get too far because I don't want to destroy that straight area. You just kind of let the paper tell you whether it's the right length. You just kind of push it up against these edges and try to hold things in as much as you can and work your way along. And when you come to here again, mark it again with your thumb. And then again, put it back into place and just test it. Now, because we've worked with so much and because this is kind of moving around so much, what I do tend to do is at this point glue what I've got, because what it's going to do is help you keep part of it in check. So I'm just using a fine tip nozzle and applying just along that edge. Now your application might be a little off like I am now. It's not a big deal because as long as you dab it away before it dries, no one's going to notice. Now this is a wood surface that actually has like a laminate to it, so it's not that big a deal if I get glue on it. It's very easy for me to take that off. But I would suggest if you don't have such a like a laminate surface where the glue is not going to stick, I'd suggest that you get, you know, something like a wax paper or a yogurt lid or something to use your table surface as much as possible to help keep your elements straight and yet not get stuck to the table, or at least be able to clean it off anyway. Now what I'm doing is using my fingernail to, well, basically I could do this too. Use any implement, either the back of your fingernail or your tool, to just rub along that edge where you applied the glue. You just want to reinforce the hold. So now that that part is behaving, it's a lot easier to continue on. And again, I'm always using the table surface as much as I can because, well, it just makes everything so much easier. And you don't want to work too fast because you need to let your glue dry and set in place. I find that when I get too impatient, I end up ruining what I'm hoping that the glue is going to do for me. But you know, us quillers, we tend to have to fight for our patience, don't we? So now that I come to this curved area, I'm just going to pinch where it starts to curve, and then again, just kind of soften that curve in place. So I'm just going to let that part overhang, because if there's any movement before it gets there, you don't want to trim at this point, because if you trim, if there's anything that moved, then you still have, you know, some tolerance to trim away. But if I trim it away, it's all gone. I can't take it back. So now that that area is complete, I can trim this part off. And then I can just use that same strip to apply some glue to finish up that corner. There's the letter J all outlined. My mom was a florist, and she taught me to look at flowers in a vase not just from one angle but from all points of view. So whenever I'm designing a card that has flowers on it, I never look at just the front view. I turn it around and make sure it still looks good no matter which way the viewer is looking at this card. So I find that it looks more real when they're in different stages of bloom. Some of the petals are open, some of them are closed. So I'm just going to show you how I made these flowers. I got these die punches from a dollar store, and I've punched the petals out of white paper, and I've made the leaves out of this green Canson Meton paper. And a little trick I learned, I think from Martha Stewart, is if you turn it upside down. So this is just a piece of scrap paper, and if I slip it in there, I can kind of see exactly where am I punching. So I'm trying to save as much paper as I can, and that way you're not wasting very much. So now that I've got my shapes, to make my petals look lively, all I did was kind of burnish them with my tool, like so. You can go either way, whichever suits your fingers. And I would just put a dot of glue in the middle of that and offset the petals, and you've got your flower. Now to create the what I call paper pollen, the little center in there, if you look really closely, it looks just like pollen. Basically, I created the center using a 1/8 inch hole punch. And then I took that same piece of paper and I raveled it up. I used a microfine cheese grater, and I grated the paper, the actual paper, on a yogurt lid. And then I took some glue and just put it on the lid, just in a little dab like that. Then using some fine tip tweezers, I just picked up the center, dabbed it against the glue, and just make sure you got some glue on the full surface of it, and just dip it right into the pollen. Now you'll see it picked up quite a bit of excess, so I just tap off the excess. And then I dip the other side. And that's when I put it against my flower. I haven't glued my flower together yet. Too busy reenacting everything. You can continue shaping your flower. So if you shape it this way, it looks like a young bud. But if you open it up the other way, it looks like a full blossom. And I find that when I glue on an angle. So I would apply the glue basically on one of these petals, so that when you glue it against your surface, it's tilting this way, and it just somehow gives it more life. So to create the leaves, I took this shape and a pair of scissors and just followed that same line towards the middle. Then I took my needle tool and scored into the middle of it to create that vein, and just gave it a little simple fold like that. So basically I would glue all my flowers down first, and then just try to see where would the leaves look most lively and point them in different directions. And then lastly, I just took maybe a 1/16 inch width of the same green paper and just, put in scroll work wherever you feel like. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up or leave me some comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.